So when a kid draws a picture of a fire, they almost always reach for the yellow crayon, right?
Oh, yeah. Every time.
Yeah, and we tend to think of that yellow flame as just, light or heat or maybe some kind of gas. But scientifically, that yellow glow isn't a gas at all. It's actually physical matter.
Right. Which is kind of mind-blowing when you really stop to think about it.
It really is. You're looking at floating particles of carbon glowing in intense incandescence right at the exact moment they're being obliterated. You are literally watching physical matter die in real time. So welcome to another deep dive. Today we've got something incredibly thought-provoking for you. We're exploring an essay titled The Sacred Return, Why Jewish Burial Trumps Cremation by Rabbi Shlomo Ezagui.
And the author takes a really fascinating approach to a subject that, well, touches every single one of us eventually. He builds this meticulous argument against the rising trend of cremation by blending molecular physics with ancient theology.
Yeah, it's a unique mix. And we should probably say right up front, today's source material takes a very firm, deeply theological stance on this topic.
Oh, absolutely. It pulls no punches.
Right. And our goal today isn't to take sides or prescribe what you, the listener, should do with your remains or endorse these specific views. We're just here to be impartial. We want to step inside the author's worldview, unpack the architecture of his argument, and really just understand his ideas.
Yeah, because the core tension he explores is this massive modern paradox. I mean, across much of the secular world today, cremation is viewed as this simple, clean, efficient, and almost gentle release.
Yeah, it's very sterilized in our collective imagination.
Exactly. But the author argues that whether you look at it through the lens of pure science or spiritual tradition, cremation is the exact opposite of gentle. He says it's a catastrophic, violent event.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand his theological argument, we really have to start where the author starts, and that is the stark physical reality of the cremator.
Yeah, before we even touch the theology, he basically forces the reader to look at the raw chemistry. He focuses heavily on this concept of molecular disintegration.
Right, because what's actually happening inside that furnace is pretty extreme.
It is. Inside a standard cremation furnace, the temperature is raised to roughly 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which is, what, about 980 degrees Celsius?
Yeah, exactly. And at that extreme temperature, you aren't just melting something down, you're forcing oxygen to just aggressively bond with the carbon and hydrogen in the body.
And that bond is violent.
So rapid and so violent that it completely shatters the existing molecular structure. It turns solid biological matter into pure gas and thermal energy.
It's an aggressive process that physicists call oxidation at the molecular level.
Right. It's literally tearing those molecules apart. I mean, the heat completely destroys every organic molecule that makes up a human being. The proteins, the fats, the complex DNA strands.
Even the cellular structures of the bones.
Yeah, all of it. It's the absolute thermal obliteration of biological material.
To kind of put that physical destruction into perspective for you, think about how a human body functions over a lifetime. It's essentially this highly complex biological hard drive, right? It stores and uses energy.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. Because every meal you eat, every breath you take is chemical energy, charging that system to power millions of heartbeats, complex thoughts, physical movements. And traditional burial is like letting that biological machine slowly, naturally power down.
Just gradually returning its raw materials to the earth.
Exactly. But cremation in this context is like taking that same intricate hard drive and tossing it into an industrial shredder. It's the difference between deleting a document word by word over several years versus just taking a giant electromagnet to the server.
Yeah, releasing all that stored energy in one sudden catastrophic burst. And the author emphasizes that this sudden burst fundamentally alters the physical remnants.
Because when society thinks of cremation, the image that usually comes to mind is, an urn filled with soft ashes.
Right, but the text points out that what's returned to a family are not ashes in the chemical sense at all. They're just the surviving, calcified bone fragments that have been mechanically pulverized by a machine into a coarse powder.
Because what, 98% of the actual physical body is entirely dispersed?
Yeah, 98%. It leaves the furnace stack as gases within just a couple of hours. We're talking carbon dioxide, nitrogen, water vapor, sulfur dioxide.
And those gases don't just stay put.
No, the author points out they immediately enter the atmosphere. Within a matter of weeks, the molecules that used to comprise a human being have spread across the hemisphere. And within a few months, they're caught in atmospheric currents, literally circling the globe.
So If the physical matter is forcibly broken down into gases and scattered across the planet, what does that mean for the concept of the person? Because this is where the essay shifts from raw chemistry to, like, the philosophy of identity.
What's fascinating here is that he uses the word pattern to describe this. From a purely biological standpoint, you aren't just a random collection of atoms. You are a highly organized, specific pattern of molecules.
Right. That unique pattern is what makes you you.
Exactly. And the author argues that cremation doesn't just dispose of a body, it violently erases that pattern. The physical structure is obliterated, and the resulting molecular fragments are just chaoticized.
He paints a very vivid picture of where those fragments go, too. I mean, the carbon atom that once made up the tissue of a human heart could be caught in the wind and absorbed by a leaf on a completely different continent.
Or it might end up in a fish in the middle of the ocean.
Or breathed in by a wild animal. The physical form is forcibly torn apart and scattered into random elements of the biosphere. Now, I can imagine a lot of people listening to this right now thinking, wait, isn't that kind of beautiful?
Oh, for sure. There's a huge movement of people who choose cremation specifically because they love the idea of rejoining nature in that broad, dispersed way.
Yeah, they want to blow in the wind, become part of a forest, or, wash over the ocean. It feels like this poetic return to the universe.
And the author totally anticipates that exact modern sentiment, but he counters it with a really specific metaphor to illustrate why, in his framework at least, this forced dispersion is a tragedy rather than a poetic return.
Right, the metaphor of the instrument.
Yeah. He says it's the difference between a beautiful melody gently fading into silence and taking the instrument, playing that melody, and just smashing it to pieces mid-song.
The smashed instrument.
Yeah.
That is such a striking image.
It really comes down to the violence and the artificiality of the transition for him. Traditional burial allows the body to re-enter the soil and decompose through slow biological processes. It's driven by microbes and enzymes.
Retaining its place as part of creation's sacred natural cycle.
Exactly. It's a gradual, harmonious absorption. Cremation, by contrast, relies on artificial, extreme thermal force. It severs the person from that natural cycle by violently chaoticizing their physical form in a matter of hours.
Chaoticizing is such a deliberate word choice. And really, this is the pivot point of the whole essay. If the physical body is an instrument that gets violently smashed by the furnace, what happens to the music?
Right.
Or, in the author's theological framework, what happens to the soul that was playing that instrument?
Well, to bridge that gap, we have to look at the foundational texts of Judaism. The author quotes the Torah, specifically Genesis 3.19. "For dust you are, and to dust you shall return."
Which is a very famous line.
Very famous. But in the traditional Jewish view, this isn't just a poetic observation about human mortality. It is a sacred directive. The body is intended to return to the earth in a state of holiness.
I mean, I'm struggling a bit with the leap from the physical remains to the spiritual experience here. If the person has already passed away and the soul has departed, why would 1800 degrees matter to a spiritual entity?
That is the essential question.
Right. Like, why does the physical treatment of the shell matter to the soul once it's already gone?
So he answers this by citing the Midrash, which is the ancient Jewish tradition of biblical interpretation. The Midrash teaches that Judaism does not view the body as just like a fleshy cage that the soul is trapped inside.
Okay.
Rather, the body and the soul are companions. They are intimate partners. They were joined together in life to serve the Creator, experience the world, perform good deeds.
They've been through every single human experience together, every joy, every illness, every act of kindness.
Exactly. And because they operated as this unified partnership for decades, they have to part ways with profound reverence and respect, even in death. And that partnership doesn't simply snap the millisecond the heart stops beating.
Right. He brings in Kabbalah here, the Jewish mystical tradition.
Yeah. Kabbalah maps out the journey of the soul. And according to these texts, the soul doesn't instantly vanish to some distant heaven. For several days after death, sometimes longer, the soul lingers in a state of profound transition.
It hovers near the body.
It remains deeply emotionally connected to its familiar home, the vessel it inhabited for its entire earthly existence.
Because it's seeking its anchor.
Right.
It's disoriented, and the body is the only home it has ever really known.
Which is the core theological reason why Jewish law insists on prompt, gentle burial. By washing the body, dressing it in traditional garments, and carefully placing it in the earth, the community is providing the soul with closure.
So the soul is essentially watching its physical partner be laid to rest respectfully, which helps it transition peacefully.
Exactly. It guides it to the spiritual realm.
So what does this all mean for cremation? When you understand that the soul is hovering and watching, the author's warning becomes incredibly stark. If that soul is lingering near the body, still spiritually tethered to it, what does it experience when that body is pushed into an 1800-degree furnace?
The text actually states that this event causes the soul unimaginable pain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the holy sages teach that incinerating the body traumatizes the soul. Instead of a peaceful transition, the spiritual partner experiences deep metaphysical agony, watching its vessel be violently destroyed in flames.
It's an aggressive act that interrupts the soul's ascent and causes immense spiritual unrest. The author also brings in a teaching from the Talmud, which is the central text of Rabbinic Judaism. He references a specific tractate, Sanhedrin 46b.
Right, which states that leaving a body unburied or treating it with disrespect is a severe sin.
And the reasoning behind this is actually beautiful. It's because every single cell, every organ, every limb of that body performed holy tasks during its life. In Judaism, these are called mitzvah.
Because the physical body is the tool through which spirituality is brought into the physical world.
Exactly. The hands gave coins to charity.
Yeah.
The feet walked to comfort a mourning neighbor. The eyes read sacred texts. The lips spoke words of comfort.
It's a sacred instrument that housed the divine image. To subject it to an incinerator is to fundamentally dishonor a vessel that spent an entire lifetime generating holiness. So how does this theological view translate into the actual mechanics of a traditional Jewish burial? Because the author contrasts the violence of the cremator with the meticulous care of Jewish funerary practices. And he points out a linguistic connection that completely reframes the concept of a cemetery.
Yeah, Hebrew often reveals the underlying philosophy of a concept through its root words. He notes that the Hebrew word for grave, which is kiver, shares the identical linguistic root as the word for offering or sacrifice, which is hakarava.
Wow. So when you view the grave not as a hole for disposal, but as an altar for an offering, the entire ritual changes.
It really does. Traditional Jewish burial involves a process called tahara, where the body is carefully and respectfully washed.
Then it's dressed in takrachim, right? Those simple, identical white linen shrouds.
Yes. And there are no pockets in those shrouds, which symbolizes that you take no material wealth with you. Then the body is gently placed into the earth. The author describes this process as being akin to tucking a beloved companion to bed after a long, exhausting day of service. Tucking a companion into bed. Contrast that imagery with the industrial roar of a furnace and the pulverizing blades of a machine. The author argues that cremation doesn't just ignore this sacred process, it actively ridicules it.
It takes an act of supreme reverence and replaces it with total erasure. But, it's crucial to understand that this reverence for the past life of the body and soul is really only half of the theological equation in the essay.
Right.
If burying the dead is about honoring the past, he argues it is equally about making a profound, unwavering statement regarding the future.
And this is where we move from the immediate aftermath of death to the ultimate, long-term eschatological hope of Judaism.
The concept is known as Tekiat HaMetim, which translates to the resurrection of the dead. And this isn't just a fringe belief, it is an absolute cornerstone of Jewish faith. It's embedded deeply in the daily prayers that observant Jews recite 3 times a day.
The essay references the prophet Ezekiel to illustrate this, right? Ezekiel has this visceral vision of a valley filled with dry, scattered, lifeless bones.
Yeah. And in the vision, the bones slowly come back together. They grow sinew, they're covered in skin. Breath is breathed back into them, they return to life.
And the author makes the point that in traditional Judaism, this isn't just some poetic metaphor for national revival, it's a literal promise. The belief is that the Creator will, at the end of days, restore life to the dead.
To explain how burial ties into this, he uses the analogy of a seed. If you have no concept of biology or botany, and you watch someone take a seed and bury it in the dark dirt, it looks like they're just throwing it away to rot.
Like they're just disposing of it.
Right. But if you understand the laws of nature, you know that the seed must be placed in the earth and must physically break down in order to eventually sprout and create new life.
That analogy perfectly captures the traditional Jewish view of the grave. The grave is the soil, and the body is the seed. Burial is a physical demonstration of faith in that eventual resurrection.
Yes. When a community buries their dead, they are making a physical declaration that they believe the seed will one day sprout, which means that choosing cremation is making a fundamentally opposite declaration.
By voluntarily incinerating the body, destroying its molecular structure and scattering those gases to the wind. The author argues you are proclaiming that the body is finished forever. You're declaring there is no seed left to sprout. The vessel is destroyed beyond recovery.
And to intentionally destroy the vessel is to reject the possibility of being raised again. It's a rejection of a core tenet of the faith. The text underscores how seriously this has been taken throughout history, too.
Yeah, generations went to crazy lengths for this.
For thousands of years, Jewish ancestors went to unimaginable lengths to maintain proper burial practices. Through brutal Roman persecutions, forced exiles across Europe, periods of crushing poverty, they always pooled their meager resources to buy land for a cemetery.
Just to ensure even the poorest among them were buried properly.
They prioritized the burial of the dead above almost everything else.
The essay specifically points to the Mount of Olives Cemetery in Jerusalem to show the historical weight of this belief. That cemetery overlooks the Temple Mount, and Jews have been burying their dead there for over 3,000 years. It is considered profoundly sanctified ground.
And tradition holds that because of its proximity to the site of the Holy Temple, those buried on the Mount of Olives will be the first to rise when the ultimate redemption arrives and Tekiyat HaMitim occurs.
People went to extraordinary lengths to be connected to this site.
Oh yeah. People living in the diaspora would ship small bags of soil from Israel to be placed in their coffins, or they'd request their bodies be transported across oceans on these incredibly difficult journeys just to be buried in that specific earth.
Because they wanted to be physically linked to this unbroken chain of faith. So when the author looks at the modern trend of cremation, he doesn't just see a personal lifestyle choice. He sees an individual severing themselves from a collective historical hope.
Right. A nation survived millennia of hardship specifically because they absolutely refused to believe that physical death was the final chapter of the human story.
He summarizes the conflict beautifully by comparing the two elemental forces at play here: fire and earth. Fire, by its very nature, consumes and destroys. It forces a chaotic, aggressive dispersion of matter.
Earth, however, receives. It remembers. It preserves.
The author states that when a body is returned to the earth naturally, it's actually fulfilling one final mitzvah, one final sacred commandment. It teaches the living humility, reminding us that we are formed from dust, and to dust we shall return.
It teaches hope, that the decay in the ground is a process of transformation and eventual rebirth, not ultimate destruction.
And it teaches respect, that the holiness of the human body, the instrument that did so much good, endures even after the breath has left it. Here's where it gets really interesting for you to consider. If we step back and look at the essay as a whole, it leaves us with a fascinating dynamic.
Yeah, let's look at the pure timeline of biological science. Eventually, over a long enough period, our molecules will scatter anyway. Even bodies that are buried carefully in the earth will eventually break down, and their atoms will re-enter the broader biosphere.
Right. Whether it takes 3 hours in a furnace or 300 years in the soil, the physical matter eventually returns to the universe.
But the author's argument forcefully suggests that the pacing and the intentionality of that release changes the meaning of the event entirely. And it begs a profound question for us to mull over about how we approach both life and death.
How much of what we value is less about the ultimate scientific outcome, the undeniable fact that we all eventually become dust, and more about the deliberate, meaningful, and respectful process of how we get there.
It really is the difference between the fading melody and the smashed instrument.
The author challenges a narrative that society has just widely accepted. He asks us to rethink the idea that what we do with our physical bodies is just a neutral logistical choice, like choosing how to dispose of waste. He completely reframes the end of life, not as garbage disposal, but as a sacred, carefully orchestrated return. So the next time you hear someone describe cremation as the simple or clean option, you might find yourself picturing that glowing yellow flame.
And remembering that underneath the sterilized surface, there is a profound, violent collision between the laws of physics and the sanctity of identity.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time to unpack another fascinating perspective. Until then, keep questioning the things that seem simple.